Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the 64 Audio U4s. Now, if you're at all familiar with the brand 64 Audio, you probably know them as one of the best and most expensive brands in the IEM game. They've got IEMs like the U12T, the Trio, they're IEMs I've reviewed in the past. Kind of legendary in the hobby, but also kind of legendarily expensive. They're basically $2,000 and above for those IEMs. Now, the U4s here, it's not exactly cheap, but this is kind of the new entry level into the brand at just $1,100. And while 64 Audio has released a number of sub $2,000 IEMs, this one, their cheapest, I actually think is their best. And that's what we're going to talk about here in this review. So I've had this IEM for about 4 weeks now, been listening to it, comparing it with some others, and I'm ready to tell you what I think and hopefully answer all your burning questions. Like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. If you have any questions about the U4s that I don't answer in the review, stick around to the end of the review and we'll have some back and forth conversation. Hopefully answer all your questions and probably answer some questions about comparisons that I don't make here in the review, but I hope I got some good ones for you as well. With that out of the way, a quick shout out to 64 Audio for sending this in for review. If you want to check out a link to the U4s, of course, I've got it in the description down below. And with that out of the way, let's jump to the table and start talking about the physical stuff. Then we'll get into talking about the sound. Then we'll get into comparing this IEM with a couple of other competitors in its price range. And then I'll give you the score and the conclusion and all that jazz. So let's start. Here we've got the packaging, which is pretty classic 64 Audio packaging, even though this is I'll put budget in air quotes. This is the low end of their IEMs. The packaging and accessories that you get with it are basically exactly all the same as what you would get with their $2,000 and $3,000 IEMs. So they're not skimping out anywhere there. And I would say that the accessories are actually pretty decent here. Let's start over here. Well, you of course get a little shirt clip. Not a thing I use. You get a little cleaning brush, something I probably should use, but I don't. And then they also include their pretty standard case here. It's a nice semi-hard shell, and I don't know, it's a nice little case. Again, it's kind of made out of a faux leather. I'll give it a smell test. Oh, that might actually be real interesting. Okay, didn't expect that. But yeah, generally a nice little case there. You of course also get, look at this, 64 Audio paraphernalia. It's just a little sticker, which I think more IEM manufacturers should include stuff like stickers. Let us be fanboys or fangirls. They of course include a number of ear tips, and including, there's basically 3 different sets of ear tips here if you can't completely make out what's going on. You've got your foam ear tips here around the center. You've got your 64 Audio standard ear tips here, which are a little bit on the short side. And then you've also got a full set of spin fits. These are pretty typical spin fit. I'm not sure, they're not quite CP100. I'm not sure exactly the model on it, but a pretty classic spin fit. You might notice I'm not using any of these, and that's just because, you know, typically when I get an IEM, I roll between all my different tips that I've got available. I would say of the bunch here, the spin fits were the closest to fitting me the best, but I've actually got a different set. I've got soft ears tips on mine at the moment. Okay, what else do we get here in the package? Here, let's highlight this a little bit, and we'll probably get back to this in a little bit as well. These are little tuning filters, and it comes with 3 in the box, 3 different pairs of tuning filters in the box, and it actually comes with a 4th one that is included, but not inside the box. That's the one that I've got installed here. Basically, these little tuning filters pop out of the side of the IEM, and then you plug them back in, and what they do is they adjust how much isolation you get from the IEM, which seems like that's kind of like on paper the number one change that they're intended to affect, but I think for most people what they really impact is the amount of bass that you get. And these in fact represent a really significant dialing in of the amounts of bass that you want, where you can go all the way from, this is the MX or the M10 module, has the least amount of bass. This one's kind of got a medium amount of bass, and that one has a lot of bass. Actually, these two are pretty close to the same one, and I think a lot of people wanted there to be something in between the M15 and the M10. Hence, they've now released this one, which is the M12 module. And again, it didn't come inside the box, but apparently it's shipping free with this IEM, so that's a nice little bonus. And it does indeed give you kind of an in-between bass level, which again, we'll talk a little bit more about it later. But let's talk now about the IEM and the build quality on this. Although you might notice I'm not using the stock cable. So I guess we'll talk quickly about the stock cable. It's a fine stock cable. And in fact, 64 Audio's cables in the past have been kind of not the best, if I'm perfectly honest. And I would say this is an upgrade over some of the 64 Audio cables I've tried in the past. You can see that it lies flat. There's no, strong memory in it, but there is a little bit of kinkiness to it. There's something about the braid on this IM or this cable. I don't know exactly. I don't make these things, so I can't tell you exactly why. But this, I would say, during using this the same way I use all my other cables, it does tend to get a little bit kinked up and unaesthetic. Here's kind of like an example. And it just doesn't look quite as tidy as I like. And so that's why I'm using another cable. There's nothing wrong with this cable. In fact, it's got some nice stuff going on for it, like including a very functional chin cinch or chin slider. I dig that. And of course, you've got your preformed ear hooks with these 2-pin connectors that I kind of dig. In fact, I haven't seen 2-pin connectors like these on other cables. It would be nice to be able to get those easily on a different cable because, well, it's just nice to customize and personalize. But nevertheless, I would say this cable is a decent stock cable, but nonetheless, I have replaced it with an alternative cable. Maybe we'll talk about this cable in particular in the Q&A, but that is kind of neither here nor there. So let's talk about the earpieces themselves instead. And I gotta say, this is one of the best looking 64 Audio IEMs out there. Again, even though this is one of the least expensive, in fact, it is the least expensive that they sell. I'm not gonna say it's the best looking, but it might be their second best looking, would be kind of my take right there. Yeah, it's just the very classic 64 Audio look. Basically the exact same shell that you've seen on a bunch of their other IEMs. It is an all metal aluminum shell, I assume, as you would expect at this price point, and kind of a, this is what their universal fit is like. And I guess we'll do a little bit of a fit demonstration so I can talk about how these things fit. Punch in on that so you can take a look. I would say that the shell shape on it, or the shell size on here, is medium size. It's not medium large, it's not small or anything like that, but I think most people will have no issues with this thing fitting into their ear. Now, in terms of ingress, egress, perfectly easy, as you saw. Like, I don't have to fiddle with it to get a stable fit or anything like that. It just plugs in and settles in there quite well. There's no sharp edges or anything like that, so I would say this is pretty comfortable. Some things that maybe stand out that you can't really tell right here looking is that I would say the nozzle is slightly on the long side, not especially long, but it does hold the IM out of my concha a little bit. As you can see, it's not totally nestled inside of the concha. And I would say because of that, and because of the shape, which doesn't have any molding to fit into the folds of my ear or anything like that, I would say that fit security is just so-so on this IM. And that's, again, true of pretty much all of 64's universal IEMs, is that fit security is just kind of so-so. Mostly it is reliant on getting a nice seal and the ear tip having a good grip on the inside of your ear. And that's where, like, some of the standard stock 64 audio tips, I don't think have a very good grip. It might, depending on the shape of your ear canal, actually work out for you. But for me, they don't really work out. And so for me, having a grippier silicone, the spin fits actually have a pretty decent grip on them. The foam tips should have a pretty good grip on them. And what I am personally using is these are Soft Ears Ultra Clear tips, which again, just kind of happened to work out well for me on this IM, given the length of the nozzle, the width of my ear canal, where they happen to fit with my ear canal, and the grip levels on these are pretty good. So that's why I've got it. And I would say with this setup, again, I would say comfort is pretty good, and fit security is decent. I can make it through a night without these things falling out, but they're not gonna lock in place the way that something like, a Moondrop S8 might. For example, let me tidy that thing up for you. And I think that's about as much as I have to say about the physical stuff. So let's just dive right in and talk about the sound here on the 64 Audio U4s. And like I typically do, let's start by just describing the sound signature, which I've actually broken up a little bit in here. This is gonna be a little bit different because it's got those bass tuning modules and because they're so significantly impactful. I'm going to describe the sound above 1000 hertz, and then I'll describe the sound below 1000 hertz, which is basically the bass frequencies, okay? So let's just start with the vocal region and treble. Above 1000 hertz, I would describe this as a warm neutral with somewhat of a relaxed upper mid-range, which results in vocals being a little bit on the husky side. It's got a bit of a mid-treble emphasis as well that brings back some of the presence of vocals, even though they've got that little bit of a dip, but it brings back more of like the edge of the vocals presence, and it prevents them from, really being masked into the background. And as you would expect of most 64 audio IEMs, the treble extension on this, I would say, is very, very good. Now, below 1000 hertz is, again, where things change pretty significantly depending on which of these modules you use. That can go anywhere from being a really deep and bassy set to a neutral but still pretty punchy in the bass set, right? Kind of depending on what you choose. The bassier modules, which would be like the M20 and the M15 especially, again, they'll give you the most bass impact there. There is a little bit of a sacrifice. They'll push down the vocal presence a little bit. And then the M10 module, which I've got here, this is the least bass module. And to an extent, the M12, it's kind of a balance in between. They can give the U4s actually a little bit of a brighter tilt to it, especially with the MX module. But honestly, still vocals come across a little bit husky and warm. So regardless of which apex module you would choose, you're going to get sort of a warm, husky vocal presentation. And the bass is really just going to be kind of competing with the treble in terms of overall balance. And do you end up with a sound that is just more bass oriented and like really thick and warm and aggressive there, or do you end up with a sound that is a little bit on the bright side? And again, you get to dial in to exactly where you want. So what do I like here about the sound on the U4s? Honestly, I like it a lot. I think it's a really good sounding IEM. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. It's hard to fault the tuning, especially for a general audience, right? It's just a sound that will work for a lot of people. Again, it does have that classic 64 audio upper mid-range dip. You'll see it on the U12T, the U6T. There's even some parallels with things like the Trio and stuff like that. On paper, I think it does look a little bit weird, but when you're listening to it, it doesn't sound awkward at all. If anything, it does push vocals maybe a little bit far back, but the vocal tonality just sounds natural and organic, and it sounds right. It is, again, a little bit laid back, somewhat of a warm neutral with the ability to dial in the bass levels that you like. And then I think it's also it's got a weight and a physicality behind it that a lot of IEMs just kind of struggle to do. Talking about the treble, I think the treble is actually, well, I shouldn't say actually, 64 audio typically does treble really, really well. And this is, I think, a good example of it. It is satisfyingly quick, well-defined, and well-extended, but never gets sharp. Hi-hats will have a very satisfying delicateness and decay in their hit without any sense of splashiness. And it also handles sibilance really, really well. I would say also in combination with that mid-range tuning, it just gives you a rich, organic mid-range with a lot of texture and weight behind the sound. And then, of course, there's the bass, which I already mentioned. There is potentially lots of bass on this, and honestly, 64 audio is just known for having really good bass. And I think the U4s is no exception. It hits real sturdy, gives a strong sense of body and weight behind the music, and it also digs really deep. Again, depending on the module you choose, there's a little bit of bass roll off with the lighter bass modes, but I don't know, it doesn't really come across as a problem for me. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very satisfying bass with, again, the ability to turn it up. And even though you're turning up the bass, it never gets to become like bad bass, right? It will start masking out the mid-range, but it never gets to the point where it's like fluffy, soft, boomy, boxy bass. It's just becomes more bass. And if that's what you want, you get to dial it up. So that's the stuff that I love here on the U4s. So what are the things that maybe I don't love about this? And well, I'd say that the primary thing is that I'd say the delineation between sounds is not especially standout strong here on the U4s. That warm, thick frequency response that they've got here tends to not be a tuning that will lend itself towards that delineation between sounds. And that's part of why I tend to prefer sort of a brighter tune in general. It just means that the imaging on this IEM is, I would say, so-so. I mean, I'm saying so-so for the price. It's good imaging, but it is somewhat on the so-so side. I would say the depth of it is actually pretty stellar. A lot of that is owed to the really good bass quality, but if you're looking for just that really clear separation between instruments and like positioning of sounds, I don't think that this IEM is necessarily the IEM that's going to do that the best. Likewise, I would say that vocal resolution is not standout on this model, and part of that I'm going to attribute to that dip in the upper mid-range. You get that relaxed upper mids, plus the elevated bass especially will create a little bit of masking of vocal detail. Both of those qualities can be improved, again, especially using the MX module. It kind of does transform this IEM into somewhat of it's a very dual purpose IEM. And it does claw back some of that vocal texture and resolution, and also even a little bit of that imaging as well using the lighter bass modules, but it does also somewhat spoil, I think, this IEM's reason for being, right? It's like, do you get this IEM for being a neutral, an MX module U4s? Yeah, maybe. I think if you're going for that sound, there's probably other IEMs I would recommend. It's nice to have it in its back pocket. Where I think this IEM really is at its best, for me, it would be with the M12 module, but I think even with the bassier modules, it's quite a lot of fun. So those are my thoughts here on the U4s, but like I mentioned, we're gonna bring in some competitors and talk about how this thing stacks up exactly versus them. So let me pull in. We've got here the 64 Audio Neo. Shout out to Adrian for loaning me this. I've been listening to this for the past almost week, comparing it with the U4s. We've also got over here the The Audio Monarch Mark II, another hybrid IEM, actually a tribrid. And then here, just for funsies, I pulled in the 7th Acoustics Supernova, which is a bit of an oddball here on this table, but maybe I'm just super biased, so that's why I've got it up here. But yeah, let me coil this up and we will get into breaking down how these IEMs compare. Let's see, present them well. Monarch, show some light. There you go. Okay, that's decent. There we go. We're not getting the light, whatever. All right, let's talk about these individual IEMs like we just got done talking about here with the U4s. This is a hybrid IEM. I didn't even talk about the driver configuration. As you can probably guess from the number, there are 4 drivers, 3 balanced armatures, 1 dynamic driver, and it comes in as we discussed, $1,100. Here is 64 Audio's Neo, another one of their sub $2,000 IEMs. This one is a 9-driver IEM. I think it's got 8 balanced armatures and 1 dynamic driver. Price on this one is actually $1,700. And then of course the The Audio Monarch Mark II, which I've reviewed in the past. This one is a tribrid, so it's got 2 ESTs in the treble. It's got 6 balanced armatures, and of course a dynamic driver for the bass. This one's coming in at $1,000. And then finally here we've got the 7th Acoustics Supernova. This one is the cheapest here on the table at just $700, and it is an all balanced armature set. It's got 6 BAs, no dynamic drivers, no nothing else. So that's how they compare, at least on paper. Let's talk about how they compare in terms of sound signature. So the U4s, like we just got done talking about, I would describe as somewhat of a bassy neutral sound. It's relaxed, it's warm, it's thick, but generally pretty natural sounding. The Neo, I would say, is honestly not too far off from the U4s, if I'm honest. It's noticeably, I'd say it has noticeably more vocal presence here on the Neo, but also more relaxed mid-treble, which is interesting. So it gives it somewhat of a darkness up top, while vocal presence tends to be pushed forward a little bit versus the U4s. It has the same bass module options. As you can see, this has got one of the bass modules in here. But I would say that this one tends to be slightly bassier overall than the U4s's. And also maybe worth calling out that this one only comes with the MX, M15, and M20 modules. It does not come with the M12 module. Over here with the Monarch Mark II versus the 64 Audio IEMs, the Monarch is comparatively lean sounding. It is more of a vocal forward IEM, pretty light on the mid bass and pretty heavy on the sub bass, which is pretty typical of what The Audio does. So yeah, I would say that this is definitely not quite bright because there's not a lot of like, it's not like a bright treble emphasis, but just it's a vocal tune. So it's got that upper mid-range push, and is much high, index is much higher on clarity. Whereas here with the 7th Acoustic Supernova, I would just describe this as honestly my kind of neutral. It is a vocal focused sound similar to the Monarch, but it doesn't lose that low end body. It does have a nice sense of lower mid-range warmth to it. It does have also, I would say, the least sub-bass emphasis of anything here on the table. Although versus the Monarch, I would say in more situations, the bass here hits a little bit better than the Monarch. It's depending on what you're listening to. If you're listening to like electronic music that has a bunch of sub-bass, the Monarch's gonna smack, I think, a lot harder. But in a lot of other content, like, you know, rock music or something like that, where you don't have those really deep sub-bass tones, I think that something like this tuning actually comes across with a little bit more body and weight behind the bass. So that's how they kind of compare in terms of sound signature. Let's talk about them now in terms of technical performance. So the 64 Audio U4s, just really sturdy, satisfying bass. It hits deep. And that contributes to just a really good sense of body without ever getting muddy. I would say instrument separation is not especially strong on this, but it's not because it's muddy or anything like that. It's just not where its strengths lies. And I would say the imaging is, well, I'll say it's pretty human. Although again, I think that the depth on this is really good because of that bass quality. The Neo honestly has very, very similar strengths and weaknesses versus this. I would do say that the vocal texturing is a little bit better here on the Neo, I think because it's pushed forward a little bit more, but that just means that you get a little bit more of that grit and graveliness in a vocal if it's there in the recording. But I would say that separation and imaging is maybe a little bit of maybe a half step behind the U4s. It's not like a big difference, but probably because the treble is a little bit more relaxed here, the imaging becomes a little bit more between the eyes is kind of what I found. And I found that also the bass is maybe a little bit bloomier and not quite as well defined as it is here on the U4s. But honestly, I think there's more similar between these two IEMs than there is different. And if anything, it's kind of standout that the cheaper IEM is the one that overall I prefer. The Monarch Mark II, kind of opposite strengths and weaknesses, if I'm honest. Where these two can sound really thick and bodyful and just like have a lot of physicality behind it, the Monarch can kind of come across a little bit thin and bodiless. But where it's really strong is in that delineation between instruments. If you want that strong separation between sounds, you want that strong positioning, I really do think that the Monarch Mark II does a better job of that, and just gives you a wider stereo image, although the depth is maybe a little bit on the average side here with the Monarch. And then the Supernova, I think it's just kind of a good balancing between, honestly. It's not nearly as thick and weighty as the 64 Audio IEMs, but it's definitely meatier than the Monarch on average, again, depending on kind of the mix of your particular music. But it's got a better sense of body to it. And I think that the delineation and between sounds and the imaging is comparable with the Monarch. Maybe a little bit of a step behind in terms of like the micro contrast and the vocal texture that the Monarch can pull out. But honestly, it's pretty stinking close. And given the other advantages of the Supernova, I think overall this would be my preference over the Monarch. But they're both doing kind of similar things. And then finally, let's talk about form factor, physical stuff, and we'll punch in on these things and ruin my beautiful coils. The U4s, honestly, I love the look of this IEM, and the build quality in it feels really quite nice. The fit is, I would say, so-so. It's good. It's a decent fit. I don't think most people are going to have a problem with it, but it's not going to fit you luxuriously and stick in place the way that some of the semi-custom designs will. The 64 Audio Neo, I mentioned that I think the U4s is the second best looking 64 Audio IEM. The Neo, I think, is the first best. And I think this is just a gorgeous, gorgeous IEM. It's got kind of that abalone shell look behind it. The red module, if you're turned off by that, that is not the stock module. So normally it will come with some version of silver in there. But overall, just really beautiful IEM, and basically otherwise the exact same build and same considerations with the fit. It is a decent so-so fit, but it's not going to lock into your ear amazingly. The Monarch Mark II, I would say the look on this thing is okay. It's a little bit, I don't know, it's a little okay. I don't hate it, but probably the biggest problem that I have with the build on this IEM is just that it is so stinking big. Can you see how big this is versus the 64 audio IEMs? Oh my gosh, for my ears, fit is just generally not very good. I make it work, but it's not the most comfortable IEM, and I've seen a number of people have issues with the fit on this IEM just because of how large it is. Otherwise, I would say build quality on it feels pretty nice. It's a plastic shell, but pretty well custom molded. And then finally here, we've got the 7th Acoustics Supernova, which I gotta just say, I think this IEM looks great. It's also got an abalone shell behind it. The pattern that you see back here will be personalized to your tastes as you are buying it as part of the purchasing process. And then the fit on this thing is actually pretty excellent for my ears. Fits in, locks in really easily, and it's comfortable, maybe a little bit. I would describe this as kind of a medium large fit, but then fit security is just absolutely great for me. And I think that's going to do it. I almost grabbed the wrong IEM. It's going to do it for my thoughts here on the 64 Audio U4s. So who is this IEM for? Well, I think this IEM is maybe for someone that's interested in the 64 audio sound and maybe doesn't want to spend $2,000 bucks, but maybe even more than that. Like, why would you be interested in the 64 audio sound? I think this brand does a sense of weight and body behind their IEMs just kind of better than almost any other brand. U12T, like why people like that IEM is because it does that really well, and it does it with really excellent technical performance. I think the technical performance on this is not quite to the U12T standards, but the bass might actually be a little bit better. I don't know. But overall, honestly, I think this is a really good IEM, and out of 5 stars, I'm gonna give it a very, very solid 4 stars out of 5. And if you wanna check it out, of course, I got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you like this video, if you found it helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and join me on Discord, where I am all week having chats with really good people, talking about audio stuff. And if you got any more questions about the U4s or anything else out there, there's probably someone there in the Discord that can help you out, including me. I am there. I guess I'll catch you on the next super review unless you're here live, in which case, hang out and let's have a little bit of a chat about the U4s. Cheers.